CICP, as you all know, is a unique, nationally recognized strategic collaboration of executive leaders from prominent regional corporations, philanthropic foundations, and universities committed to developing responsive initiatives, making critical investments, and delivering ambitious projects to advance inclusive prosperity. Now, under David's leadership, CICP has formed two new major industry initiatives: AgriNovus Indiana for the ag biosciences, and Ascend Indiana for workforce and talent, which the airport uses all the time, and has also successfully driven the development of 50 acres of 16 tech and innovation districts immediately northwest of downtown Indianapolis. Now, David is also one of the founders and then served as the president CEO of CICP's BioCrossroads Life and Science Initiatives from 2005 to 2018. While leading BioCrossroads, he has raised nearly $400 million in philanthropic, corporation, and venture capital funding, organized and drove the formation of the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute, and forged unique collaborative and to advance the national competitiveness of the region's life sciences and healthcare sectors. Now, I could go on and on. David Johnson is also a graduate of Harvard University, Harvard Law School, and an Oxford University's New College as a Rhodes Scholar. Please join me in welcoming David Johnson.
Mario, thank you. That was a wonderful introduction and kind of a hard one to follow. So thank you very much for that. I am really pleased to be here today speaking to the Economic Club. This is an organization I had the privilege to be in Mario's position in a few years back in 2017, actually, when we changed the format to have the questions and answers at the end. So we'll see if I regret that change or not by the time we're done here today. But it's really good to be with all of you. And to have a chance at this time of transition in my own career to speak to you about the last couple of decades of economic growth in our region. I saw Dave Ricks here earlier, and that was intimidating too, because he gave an incredible speech to this club back in March. This will not, or April, this will not be of that same tenor, but it's on some of the same topics and themes. And I have been involved in this in sort of a classic Indianapolis way. First as a volunteer, leading what ultimately became the founding of BioCrossroads, and then as the leader of that initiative, and then for the past 10 years as the leader of the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, CICP, which is perhaps an organization that doesn't mean a whole lot to all of you because we go a whole lot more by our branded initiatives than we do by the name of CICP itself, and that's intentional because those initiatives are doing the heavy lifting and the real work of building the region's economy. Those are organizations like BioCrossroads and TechPoint and Ascend Indiana, Connexus Indiana, AgriNovus Indiana, and as Mario mentioned, 16 Tech. They're all important leadership initiatives. They all deserve more time than I can give to talk about them today. But before I do that, I do want to put some things into more of a historical and personal context first. When you reach this point in your career, everything becomes historical. So you want to talk about that a little bit before you actually get to the substance of what you're going to. So I grew up here. I am a proud graduate of Broad Ripple High School. Still, to me, one of the best places I ever went for my education. Taught me a lot, a uniquely diverse environment that taught me a whole lot of things I needed to know. But when I did grow up here in the 60s and 70s, this was a community that had a lot of trouble believing in itself. Those of you who are old enough to remember will recall that many referred to Indianapolis, not always so lovingly, as Indianopolis. The leading FM rock station of the day was ironically named WNAP, playing off our other nickname, Naptown. This story may be apocryphal, but one community leader told me in 1970 or 1971. But when the downtown Hilton, now the Sheraton City Center Hotel, was being built on the corner of Ohio and Meridian Streets downtown, the developers were offered but decided to take a pass on adding a grand hotel entrance to the hotel off Monument Circle. They had concluded that such a dramatic effort would just be a waste of money. After all, no one ever really wanted to come to downtown Indianapolis beyond those relative few travelers who had to come here for business or government meetings. Most of us just didn't consider Indianapolis to be a destination location in any way. People way too often talked about it as a cornfield surrounded by a racetrack. Now, for fortunate kids like me with opportunities to go elsewhere, this was a fairly easy place to leave, candidly, for school and career without much of a second thought. Life takes many unexpected turns. And a very good turn brought Ann, my wife, and me back here as newlyweds in 1983. I'd been away for 15 years almost. And what we found when we came back here was a wildly different place. The year before our return, a group of community leaders somehow had the vision and the audacity and then the temerity to win out of the blue the bid for Indianapolis to host the National Sports Festival, which was a big deal. This was a U.S. Olympic Committee event that we beat out Philadelphia to host. We'd never done anything like that before. It really went well. It all worked. As we were returning, this very convention center was in the process of being expanded, at that time featuring a new central component that suspiciously looked like a football stadium with a dome over it. At the time, when asked repeatedly, Mayor Hudnut insisted this was just creative convention space. But sure enough, a little more than a year later, the Baltimore Colts were persuaded to move and call Indianapolis and that Hoosier Dome their proud new home. And perhaps most outrageous of all, when it came to ambition at that point, just 3 years after that, Indianapolis won the right against intense and personal competition, not only from Cuba, but directly from Fidel Castro himself, to host the Pan American Games here. For 2 remarkable weeks in 1987, more than 4,300 athletes from 38 countries competed in 30 sports for over 1,000 medals. It all worked primarily thanks to the dedicated efforts of 37,000 community volunteers. I was a lawyer at Baker & Daniels at that time, today Faegre Drinker, and many of those volunteer leaders came from my law firm. I saw it and I knew this was not the Indianapolis that I grew up in. This was a place I could scarcely recognize, a place that had its act together and had the guts to box very well above its weight. And the momentum still grew. National sports governing bodies like the USA Track and Field moved here. And at one point, even the National Rowing Association decided to come, which was really remarkable because Indianapolis is the largest city in the world that's not on a navigable body of water. But in many ways, the peak moment in this odyssey of ambition arrived when another group of community volunteer leaders began to dream about Indy not only as a great host city for the NCAA Men's Final Four basketball events, but maybe as the permanent home for the NCAA itself. They decided to go on a quiet foray to the NCAA's then headquarters in Kansas City to see if there might be interest. There was. They hit pay dirt. The NCAA was all in, and they were deciding to come right away. This was late 1996. So suddenly the state needed to find a suitable location for them to come to relocate close to the downtown or ideally in it. Newly elected Governor Frank O'Bannon drew that card and agreed to do just that, setting aside a premier site at what was then quickly becoming the White River State Park. And then came the not so small matter of the other part of this, which was the cost of this major move, costs the state and the city really could not cover, especially on short notice. Specifically, $50 million of those costs for relocation and construction expenses for the NCAA to move here. And so the hat got passed pretty urgently to the private sector, and in a little more than a month, in early 1997, Central Indiana's corporate and philanthropic leaders stepped forward in a major way. They came through with the money required to seal what is arguably the best deal for economic development this region ever got. The NCAA has been a wonderful citizen and corporate citizen here ever since, hosting events, doubling its footprint, upping our game here in ways that none of us could ever have imagined. But still, this would be a tough act to follow and not necessarily one we could. It was expensive. And besides, and really, what more were we going to do to establish our credibility as a destination for sports and events? And on that subject of more, beyond sports, what really was next when it came to this region's economic future? How did we take our newfound self-respect and start to build a whole 21st century economy on it? That's where the Central Indiana Corporate Partnership picks up at least a part of the story. Following the NCAA's welcome arrival in 1998, a group of philanthropic leaders, especially Lilly Endowment, along with major corporate executives, many in this group had been involved in making sure the NCAA got here, along with research university leaders, decided we needed to do a new type of organization here, a new type of leadership organization. And that organization needed to be able to do at least two things. First, it should, and it did, consider where the region should be heading. Beyond sports and events, what new kinds of projects, investments, and opportunities could drive things faster? How could the corporate community be best involved in investing to make things happen? And if major investments were going to be required, how could we be sure that corporate and foundation leaders who would ultimately be asked to pay for them got involved early enough that they could have a say in which investments got picked and how they got made? Second, as we entered a new century, we should, and we did, determine our genuine best bets for sustained economic growth and great jobs needed to be in certain industries. Sports and events, hospitality had given us a newly proud identity. We were proud and good at that. The revenues from that were terrific, and they have remained that way. But jobs in entertainment and hospitality alone were not going to be enough to power our economy into the tech-intensive 21st century. Now that we finally had our confidence, it was time to do something with it. To take stock of our assets, begin to focus on growing some of our best leading industrial sectors that could provide the best opportunities every day for this region to rise and stay on top. There really wasn't any time to waste, because at the dawn of the 21st century, it was already clear we were entering an increasingly competitive world of new digital and biotechnologies and a continuing scramble for talent and jobs. We just didn't realize the pace at which all those things were all about to happen and keep happening. Central Indiana Corporate Partnership, or CICP, was the result, again, along with supporting the CICP Foundation. It was all intentionally formed as a compact nonprofit network of approximately 60 to 65 CEOs or regional leaders of our leading companies. These executives came together with presidents from our major research universities, several of our private colleges, 3 of our philanthropic foundations, starting with Lilly Endowment to form CICP. Many of our members are here today. CICP's members and our investments span multiple years, well beyond election cycles. Our projects are designed to be long-standing additions and to shore up long-standing foundations to this region's economy. And as a result, as I mentioned earlier, we're probably best known for our very first set of priority projects, and that was organizing and connecting the most productive advanced industry sectors of Indiana's 21st century advanced industry economy. What does that mean? Well, advanced industries do various things, as I'll mention in a moment, but they have several things in common. Together, they represent about 11% of the jobs in a region, which is good to have, and more than many other states do. That 11% contributes almost 30% of the GDP of the economy. They represent 80% of the patents, they hire 85% of the engineers, and they represent 95% of industrial research and development, in other words, innovation spending. So these are the industries everybody wants to have. We've set up 5 of these standing collaborations because we already had them as branded initiatives that we coordinate under the CICP umbrella. Each of them is expertly led and smartly staffed, and each organizes and connects the stakeholders and participants in some of Indiana's best sectors. BioCrossroads for life sciences, TechPoint for digital and software technologies, ConnexUs Indiana for advanced manufacturing and logistics, AgriNovus for the agbiosciences, and cutting across everything else, Ascend for talent and workforce. Each of these enterprises has in turn built its own business boards and advisory councils well beyond ours. These related organizations bring dozens more of corporate leaders and many targeted projects and deliverables to the table. And they work all across the state because despite our Central Indiana name, most of these initiatives work in all 92 Indiana counties. So beyond seeking to organize Indiana's industrial economy by setting up and coordinating these sector initiatives, which all are thriving and doing great work today, you should ask, what has CICP itself gotten done over the past few years beyond that? Specifics are important, but let's face it. Reading off lists of specifics can be really mind-numbing. So I am not a great slide talker, but what I'd like to do is maybe to put the first slide up here. These will be quick, I promise you, about the major categories of our work. First has been raising and investing more than $150 million in new venture capital funds. Next slide, please. Building new research institutes to help advance key industries. Next slide, please. Launching a wide range of employer-driven workforce initiatives to connect growing demand for skilled talent to a supply that still needs to grow a whole lot faster. Next slide, please. Cornering the market when it comes to researching and understanding the main drivers of Indiana's economy today and in the future. Next slide, please. Making the 16 Tech Innovation District, talked about for nearly 30 years, become a reality as the place where innovation happens and entrepreneurs gather. And addressing historic disparities of opportunity in our regional economy through establishing the Business Equity for India initiative, for hiring and procurement, and for more supportive public policy outcomes, addressing healthcare impediments for Blacks and other citizens of color. That last slide you're looking at there is sort of what you get when you put all this stuff together, which is kind of messy, but it's our solar system map of the different initiatives, the different enterprises, and all the things that they are doing, and it gets more complicated every year. CICP is the organization that's defined for Central Indiana what a good job really is, and what the living wages are, at least in this case, $18 an hour plus healthcare benefits. That job needs to pay to be really good, or at least to start being good. And especially in the early stages of COVID, when the going got tough in coping with the sudden and massive healthcare workplace challenges of the pandemic, CICP's leaders really stepped forward behind the scenes. They helped state officials rapidly organize a comprehensive statewide COVID testing program at a time when tests were scarce, and the very nature of the virus itself was mysterious and scary. That same group of leaders went on to provide and publish for the state first of their kind detailed and tested playbooks for companies, especially manufacturers, who needed some quick practical answers as to how to actually stay in business when they were still trying to figure out what the pandemic even was. The mission was to keep them open and offices functioning during a pandemic that people were going to have to figure out how to work with and live with before vaccines could arrive. Those playbooks were the first of their kind in the nation. They drew an awful lot of great attention, and they were heavily used throughout the state of Indiana. I am so proud of what this organization and our stakeholders have been able to accomplish, of the hundreds of millions of dollars deployed, of the unmatched talents of the over 120 dedicated professionals we have. And I'm proud of the close ties CICP enjoys every day with the many other public and private and nonprofit organizations who are also working hard to advance our region's prosperity. So that's how CICP got started and what it is and some of what the organization has gotten done. It could only happen when it did. Once Indy found its pride at just the right moment to greet the next round of challenges and opportunities of the 21st century, which probably means I should bring my story and talk here to a close and get on to the Q&A with Mario, and I'm going to do that in just a minute. But again, sort of the historical thing, after more than 20 years of being involved in this story, I do have just a few words on some additional lessons learned. These are mostly good, but there are also a few continuing concerns I just want to mention to you here today. Present surprises and confirmations first. I'll note just three. First, thankfully, for all the money that CICP and our stakeholders, and especially our friends at Lilly Endowment, have spent on the expert national consultants we use for so many of our studies, and there have been almost 100 of them, those consultants have mostly proven to be right. And that starts with the first consultants 20 years ago at Battelle, now known as Teconomy Partners, who did a mapping of our entire economy and ended up concluding that our region's best bets, and therefore CICP's top priorities to organize, could be found in three principal areas. First, our traditional strengths in manufacturing. Second, our emerging strengths in software and digital technology. And third, our overwhelming but unorganized advantages as a center for life sciences companies of every single kind. How'd that turn out? Well, 20 years later, Indiana still stands proud as the most manufacturing intensive state in the country. We've built an impressive digital and marketing software presence on that second point, maybe best symbolized by Scott Dorsey and the team of ExactTarget, who ended up selling that to Salesforce, changing the downtown of the skyline of the city itself. In the life sciences, Eli Lilly and Company now has the largest market capitalization of any pure pharmaceutical company in the world at nearly $350 billion. Now, that's more than 7 times the size of the company when we started BioCrossroads in 2002. Again, Dave, well done. We have 2 global headquarters companies here in related life sciences fields. Corteva in plant science, Elanco in animal health. Global headquarters of both companies right here. Companies that didn't even exist when we started all this at the turn of the century. Roche Diagnostics has an enormous new presence on the city's northeast side, and a current CEO who scaled the company so successfully over the past several years that he's about to take the helm of running the entire organization in Switzerland as the new CEO of Roche Diagnostics globally. Cook Medical is driving Bloomington's economy and now revitalizing the east side of Indianapolis. And Indiana is the #3 exporter of life sciences products in the United States. Even for good consultants, that's pretty darn good. Second good lesson, as I've now learned and seen up close for about 20 years, the essential public-private partnership, leadership that brought us such successes as becoming the place for sports is alive and well. It crosses new generations, and it's expanded to new fields of opportunity. We are still the best in class when it comes to putting together and keeping together collaborations to advance broader and bigger economic opportunities, ones that most people outside Indianapolis would never think we could actually have. CICP can be the organization we've become only because here business executive leaders believe in this place. They believe who we are as a community and as a state. They are therefore willing to make the investments of time and dollars. The time part's really important there too. To work together with partners in philanthropy and higher education and government to make this the best possible place to be. And on that topic of philanthropy, like so many other things that are possible here through their farsighted generosity, and those of us who have the privilege to work here to help in the advancing of prosperity, much of what we do at the scale we do it is only possible because of the enabling trust and the strategic determination of our colleagues at Lilly Endowment. They are indisputably our region's finest asset. You might think that collaborations of these kinds happen in many other places, maybe with some different actors, but happen. They don't. I have many counterparts, many of whom I've gotten to know a whole lot better over the past couple of years of COVID conversations for best practices, all over the country, who never miss a chance to tell me how much they envy the outsized level of strategic philanthropy and corporate investments that distinguish this place and make it work. Third positive taking here, although we always worry about being too Hoosier nice, too cautious, supposedly don't believe in taking risks, I have seen nothing but the opposite. Betting on big opportunities has continued now for well over 40 years and remains alive and well here. Consider just a few examples. The determination to keep revitalizing downtown and the near downtown with major landscape changing projects like the new global Elanco headquarters at the old GM stamping plant, Bottle Works on Mass Ave, 16 Tech across Fall Creek from IUPUI. Speaking of IUPUI, the joint decision recently by the presidents of Indiana University and Purdue to bring a 50-year hybrid experiment to a quiet close, to rethink and for sure rename IUPUI, and to have a seriously expanded footprint in Indianapolis for the full and visible engagement of both universities in the life of Indianapolis and its economy. And while we're on the topic of outrageous risk, I have to just have one more point on sports, because really, who else other than Indianapolis would ever have dared to take on the enormous risk of bidding for and then actually getting to host the entire 2021 March Madness NCAA men's basketball tournament in a single place, or rather multiple venues around a single place? And it worked in the middle of a global pandemic. Who else could have pulled that off? And really, we could do it then and beat those odds. Why shouldn't we just continue to do the whole thing going forward? It seems to me that's exactly what we ought to do. But there are just a handful. I'm sorry. Okay, yeah, thank you. I think I'm being told I need some water. But there are just a handful, excuse me. There are just a handful of things that are lingering, big lingering concerns for me and for many people who are involved and privileged to be involved in this kind of good work. So let me give you just three. First, remarkably, we are not entrepreneurial enough. Now that's strange because this is the place of rugged founders who birthed companies like Lilly and Cummins and DePuy and Zimmer and Biomed and Allison and Cook and Roche Diagnostics and ExactTarget. And yet Indiana somehow has managed to slip to 49th or 50th place when it comes to states in the nation where people decide to be entrepreneurial. This tough fact is confirmed by a wide range of indicators and an undisputed array of national experts. Lots of different signs of it, including our regrettably low numbers of new company startups, new filings for new companies, and how many Hoosiers work for companies that are less than 5 years old. What are we missing in this place that is still so good at taking outsized risks? Why aren't we more willing to start new companies or at least to work for them? It's an important question to answer because nationally, the vast majority of new jobs today come from businesses that have been around for 5 years or less. Both the IEDC and CICP have undertaken major studies of this problem recently and should have some potential responses over the course of the coming year. Hopefully, we'll begin to get a better idea of the steps that need to help us start getting a whole lot more competitive, but we have a lot of work to do. Second, speaking of a lot of work to do, and you've heard this one before, and it probably should be first, we are not nearly educated enough or skilled enough. And that we really lag at every level of educational attainment from pre-kindergarten through graduate school. The trend lines are not moving in a good direction. Too many Hoosiers, especially young ones, believe that having a high school diploma is all they're going to need to get and keep a good job. Maybe that was once true, but now, and especially post-COVID, it just isn't. It just isn't because technology is accelerating, automation is intensifying, and the number of people to help is not increasing. At this time, post-COVID, we are seeing, as our colleagues at Ascend told us in a report just 2 or 3 weeks ago, that Hoosier enrollments in higher ed opportunities, any kind of post-secondary initiative post-high school, have slipped from 65% less than a decade ago to just 53% now. And that sad story is even more true for Blacks and other peoples of color. Meanwhile, we live in a state that is first in the nation for two startling things, telling things: the per capita population of robots to people, and the numbers of jobs that are subject to disruption by artificial intelligence, including a number of jobs in the service sector. Disruptive technologies like robots and artificial intelligence, machine learning, data analytics, they are all converging everywhere, and they're converging here. And as the machines rise, we simply need to be far better prepared to do those things that only human beings can do. We have a long way to go there too. Third and finally, we're not anxious enough. I know that may sound really strange because I'm here sort of cheerleading and celebrating so much of our 50-year journey back to self-respect and national competitiveness. But there is a difference, and it's an important one, between firmly believing and finally believing in your strengths, and then assuming that that belief and your wins to date are enough without working a whole lot harder to constantly define, update, and build on those strengths. When you've had the kinds of growth successes we've seen here over the course of my career, it is so tempting to at first be surprised, and then relieved, and then excited, and then start to get just a little bit complacent. We cannot let that happen, because these are intensely competitive times, times that are redefining the notion and nature of competitiveness. And it's not just for conventions and sports events and company headquarters. It's for talent, it's for great jobs, and for a solid economic future for an entire population. Fact is that we all live in a relatively small state of fewer than 7 million people. We live in a metropolitan area of fewer than 2 million. Our population has grown some in recent years, but it is not projected to grow a whole lot more in the near future. And meanwhile, It's an aging population with many retirements in key sectors on the horizon. So we need to be doing all we can to ensure that everyone here is contributing and prepared to contribute and prepared with the skills they need to contribute to their maximum capabilities throughout their entire careers. We have a long way to go to do that, as I just referenced. Meanwhile, again, we're in a global competition for talent and opportunity. This is important. The truth is that we lack not only the mountains and oceans of the East and West Coast, as we so often say, we lack the people. We lack the volume, the scale of people, the numbers of people that are required to make a lot of these things work and succeed over the long term, unless we get a whole lot better at doing them. Indianapolis, for all its strengths, does not have the regional scale today of larger metropolitan areas that drive success in many of these areas. They have their fair share of challenges too, that some of which we do not have. But you think about places like Boston and Los Angeles and San Francisco and Denver and Austin and Seattle, places with which we are in competition, even though they're much bigger. And you think about places like Nashville and Columbus, Ohio, which we are also in competition with, and they're about the same size. We're all in the same game, but at least for now, we have, in most cases, fewer pieces on the board to play. And that's important because, ironically, the fact that we are unrivaled in manufacturing, which means we make things that people want and they want all over the world, means that we're also tightly tied to the ebbs and flows of the global economy, especially so because so many of our products are exported. For sure, globally traded industries are a great thing. They bring in new money from all over the world to drive economic growth. They also make us dependent on that global marketplace for our own success. We are scarcely large enough, though, to define and determine what that success should look like unless we push really hard. We do risk being on the receiving end of market competition and technology convergence and disruption unless we move even faster to figure out how to get and stay out front with the best stuff we've got. How to focus on those areas where we have our best competitive advantage to bring that marketplace to us. And truly to get there, we cannot afford a single misstep. We don't have anybody or any opportunity to spare. I am not for a moment trying to suggest a hopeless situation. Far from it, CICP was founded by the same kinds of leaders who founded the sports movement here, who never believed that no chance can be an option. We know and we have documented that we possess great resources and enormous potential for our 21st century economy. For 40 years, we've shown that we can figure out the game and compete. And when we do that, we win. Even if that so often means we just have to keep right on boxing a little or a lot above our weight, no matter how exhausting it may seem to be. Unlike the India of my childhood, today we live in a city and state where we are definitely in the game, but the game is getting tougher, and it's only going to get more so. We have a whole lot more we need to do, and we can't think for a moment we're fully prepared to do it. We can be, but it will take work. It will take ambition, and it will take cooperation and collaboration to envision a future where places like India and Indiana are destinations of choice for new people, for families, for companies, and for opportunities of all types. In short, it will take exactly the kind of determination and that same brand of outrageous ambition that made us decide to start going after all those major league sports opportunities nearly half a century ago. We could do it then. We did it. We can do it now. Thank you again for this chance to speak with you today, and I look forward to your questions. Yeah, sure. Thank you. I should take my water.
David, first of all, let me say, and I think I speak for myself, and I know I speak for the board, and I think I speak for everybody here, that it's quite an honor to have you here. And it's quite an honor to have such a talent at the head of CICP for so many years, and your accomplishments are evident. So thank you very much.
All right, I truly appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you. Everything I have been able to do here and the many other people I've been able to work with has been a privilege. And the people I work with feel it's a privilege to do this work too. So it's a pleasure, but it's very kind of you to say that.
Well, along those lines, and we were talking about, you're talking about what I consider the key driver of the modern economy, talent. And we see it, at least I see it in my industry. Baby boomers are retiring. We have a pilot shortage. Shocking data has come out of the educational system of the United States. 54% of the population cannot function above a sixth grade level. So what that tells me is that there's a dwindling talent pool. What are your thoughts on that? Because we need a highly leveraged talent pool for the modern economy. And it seems like talent is getting harder and harder to find because of all these factors.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. It is, of course, as you know, Mario, from your own work, it's not our problem alone. It's a problem that, we have nationally. Again, it's another one of those things that has just been rocketed out by COVID to be an even bigger challenge. I think there are a couple of things that we are doing here that make me very hopeful, that we're starting to get our arms around it. One, I need to give a shout out to Jason Clove and the team at Ascend, because they have figured out a talent initiative that starts with the employer rather than with the supply side, which is very important. I mean, oftentimes the mismatch, you've got a pretty good idea what a pilot needs to do, but in many cases, in many industries, it's a little harder sometimes to identify, you don't have the right people, but you're not sure why they're not the right people. And so really being able to focus on employers with what they need and then work with our higher education system here to help put those two together is a really important thing. We've been doing that with Ascend. They've had some good working relationships with Employee Indy here.
By the way, we're participating in that program also.
Right.
It's
It's
phenomenal.
an awesome program.
Phenomenal.
And likewise, I don't want to leave out our colleagues at the state, the Governor's Workforce Cabinet, Dave Adams at DWD, and the Governor's Workforce Cabinet recommendations, which came out last week or the week before, I think, many of which are aimed in this same kind of direction. So I think we have a better sense of what our problem is and are trying to address it with solutions that make sense. The other thing that I got to say is that we do need to do a better job of figuring out how to get more of that talent to come here. I mentioned Nashville up there. One of the things that worries me about Nashville as a competitor, we're about the same size and we have a lot of the same industry base, but they have managed as a city to bring many new people into it to fuel that base in ways that we are not doing. And we really, I think, need to look at that. We need to look at ourselves, but we also need to figure out how we make this a more compelling destination. And I know you're thinking about that every day, literally in the geographic sense too, but we need to be doing more of that.
Well, and what's interesting, tying to that, and just a comment for myself, I'm the newcomer here, but this is the finest place I've ever lived in my life, and we're the finest people. So I think what Hoosiers, the humbleness of Hoosiers is a detriment to attracting talent.
That best kept secret stuff is really detrimental.
That's horrible. Yeah.
It's really bad.
And another question, the usual roles of corporations, foundations, and universities are to drive the economy. Could you give us a tie as to what the role of local government and state government should be, in your opinion? Yeah. So I think this happens here actually pretty well, and some big chances for it coming up. So it is, I would submit, extremely important for the corporate community. And in our case, we're blessed to have a really strong, unusually strong philanthropic community who have the time and also the perspective outside of politics to have a long-term strategy to articulate some of the best things we can do and be about. And that's what our organization and many other organizations here try to do. You can't do many of these things over a long period of time, and we certainly can't scale them, though, unless state and local government are involved in them. So we can have great workforce efforts all day long, but if the state is not really doing something at scale on education and on workforce, it will not have the kind of macro impact that it needs to have. The other thing is that increasingly we're finding that, and I give the state huge credit for this, particularly in a number of the transactions and deals that Governor Holcomb's brought back over the past year, that you have to make investments as well as going out and getting new companies to come in here. You have to be prepared to make some bets and place them and bring them in, and then expect the private sector to work with them as well. So I think that it's a constant role. We are by design as an organization. We do not have public officials directly on our board, and we work with public officials every single day because virtually everything we do
if they are not really interested in it or wanting to work with it, it won't be successful.
Very good. And you've mentioned over and over again, this is an incredibly strong state for manufacturing, intensive state for manufacturing. Do you think that incredible focus on manufacturing is detrimental to the service industry, to developing the service industry, to developing tech, to developing the next level of the economy in the state, to diversifying the economy?
I don't. I understand where the question comes from, and that, we've asked that many times. I mean, the fundamental fact is we are the most manufacturing intensive state for a reason. And if much of that reason was not about technology already, those manufacturing efforts wouldn't be going on here. They would either be automated or they would be happening offshore or down south or somewhere else, but they wouldn't be happening here. And so the fact that we remain manufacturing intensive and good at making things means that that is probably going to have a big part of our future. The other thing about manufacturing that's so important is, as I mentioned, it does bring in money from outside, which services typically don't, and manufacturing does. So that's all a good thing. The challenge for us going forward is that, as I alluded to a moment ago, manufacturing is going to become both incredibly more tech intensive, and we do not have the workforce yet to do that. And it's also going to become a lot costlier to do. So if you look at the big plays that the state has announced, like Stellantis with electric vehicles in Kokomo, or the Skywater facility up near Purdue and West Lafayette, or what the state's doing with Lilly at the LEAP project in Boone County, those are huge investment projects. And they are not projects where the corporate sponsor alone is going to be able to afford the upfront and infrastructure investments to make them happen. So the state will have to, and has proven to be willing to, make some upfront bets and commitments, which is unusual for us to do in Indiana. But again, I'm very encouraged with what I'm seeing happen here. And then the whole scale of this kind of opportunity is going to be one in which we're going to have to move really quickly to prepare a workforce to do it.
Talking about education and preparing a workforce, you were quoted in saying that the separation of IUPUI into its corresponding components is a good thing. Could you expand on that?
Sure. I mean, we are very fortunate in this city to have, in addition to IUPUI, to have Marian University, to have Butler University, at the University of Indianapolis, and they have done and continue to do, under some pretty gifted leadership that I'm looking at right here, a marvelous job of really directly addressing the business economy and business priorities here in Indianapolis. What we need is even more of that. And again, the notion of scale that I mentioned just a moment ago is important. To be able to have Purdue, for example, deciding that they want to have a Purdue presence here at scale on engineering students that can work with companies and internships and a number of things like that, potentially have the opportunity to attract more of those students who come to Purdue, not to leave here when they are here, but to start working here, which would be great. All of that really helps to engage in ways that university has not really been able to focus on Indianapolis before. Similarly with IU, for Indiana University to be looking at what it means to have an urban campus as a multi-campus university, but really focusing on that urban campus in a new way for the first time is a very, very exciting thing to do. And again, will bring probably new kinds of energy and talent to the region. It's not going to be easy. I saw Andy Klein here from IUPUI, and he's having to work through this every day, but it's well worth doing. One final fact for you. When we were lucky enough to be, and you were part of this, in the top 20 finalists for Amazon HQ2.
Yep.
Okay, we can argue about whether that was a good faith competition, because like Washington
Yeah,
DC and New York won, right?
Exactly,
So
really.
that's, maybe not. So getting into that top 20 though was the place to be. I mean, you look at who else was in that top 20. It was a lot of the bigger cities I mentioned a moment ago, and some other cities like St. Louis and Columbus and Minneapolis that weren't in it. So that's what's an instructive group for us to look at. And we and our friends at the Indy Chamber spent a lot of time looking at that, sort of who's in that top 20, what do we like and what are we different from. The interesting fact in that top 20 was, of those cities, 19 of the 20 had at least one R1 research university. In other words, full meal deal, national distinguished research university in their urban core. The outlier was us. So we did not have that. We had IUPUI, but again, it was not really focused on Indianapolis in the same way. Similarly, 17 of those 20 had an engineering school as one of those R1 universities, which again, we did not have. Did that matter in winning or losing? Probably not, but is it suggestive of an attribute that we need to continue to win? Probably is.
Great. David, I could stay here all day and talk to you, but we've reached our time.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking
Thank you.
David. Thank you very much. Doing us the honor of being here. Thank you very much.